Practical Russian with Tem. Ложь, лгать, лживый.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. A little over 15 months ago, a group of Chinese scientists working on the ground at the scene of the outbreak of a brand new virus came to the conclusion that the novel coronavirus probably escaped from a government lab in Wuhan. These Chinese scientists said that in the clearest possible terms and then posted it on the internet. From our perspective, this struck us as an amazing and important story, and also, by the way, plausible. We expected a flurry of media interest in it. Where did this virus come from? That seemed worth knowing as people were dying of it. But no one asked the question. Instead, there was silence, punctuated only by occasional smirking about anti-Asian racism and conspiracy theories. And that's where it stood for more than a year, until just a few weeks ago. Then suddenly, for reasons we still don't really understand, all the smirking morons in the American news media changed their view completely overnight. Of course Corona escaped from a Chinese virology lab, duh. What do you think, it came from a wet market? Come on. That was the new consensus. An avalanche of evidence followed. The Wall Street Journal confirmed that the first Corona victims seemed to have been researchers working with bat viruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. BuzzFeed then obtained thousands of emails showing that Tony Fauci knew from the beginning that COVID may have been manufactured in China in dangerous experiments he helped pay for. The lab leak theory, it turns out, was never crazy. It was always likely true. So why did they lie to us about it for so long? A shocking new piece in, of all places, the celebrity suck-up magazine Vanity Fair answers that question in great detail. You should read it. In short, many research scientists are addicted to American tax dollars. If the American public understood just how recklessly they have behaved, endangering the entire world with their weird little experiments in poorly regulated labs in China, that money might dry up. As a former NSC official called Jamie Metzel put it succinctly, quote, "If the pandemic started as part of a lab leak, it had the potential to do to virology what 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl did to nuclear science. Can't have that. Got to keep the money flowing." So they lied about it. And then they intimidated anyone who tried to tell the truth. That would include the director of the CDC, Robert Redfield. Redfield received death threats from scientists after he suggested that the virus may have come from a lab.
I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
It's not some guy on Twitter. That's the former director of the CDC, so you think the world would stop and ask follow-up questions such as, why do you think that? Where's the evidence? But that's not what happened. Quote, "I was threatened and ostracized because I proposed another hypothesis," Redfield told Vanity Fair. "I expected it from politicians. I didn't expect it from science." But maybe he should have. Redfield had dared to buck the orthodoxy that had been imposed by the global scientific establishment. It began on February 19th, 2020, just as the virus was getting to this country and scaring the hell out of all of us. At that moment, one of the leading science journals in the world, The Lancet, published a letter that was signed by 27 scientists. That letter declared flatly and for all time that the coronavirus did not originate in a lab in Wuhan and that you'd have to be a bigot to believe otherwise. Now, that letter, we now know, was organized by Peter Daszak. Daszak is a man with everything to gain by pretending that COVID came from a wet market. Daszak was involved in gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Emails show that Peter Daszak carefully selected other signatories to the Lancet letter so that this obviously disqualifying conflict of interest would remain secret. At one point, Daszak wrote to another scientist called Ralph Baric, who was also working on gain-of-function research in China, telling him not to sign the letter. Here's why, quote, "We'll put it out in a way that doesn't link it back to our collaboration, so we maximize an independent voice," end quote. So the whole thing was a fraud, and yet it worked. It was in the Lancet. Everyone trusts the Lancet. In fact, Tony Fauci himself cited Dazzik's letter as proof that the virus was not caused by research he was funding.
If you look at the evolution of the virus in bats and what's out there now, it's very, very strongly leaning towards this could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated, the way the mutations have naturally evolved. A number of very qualified evolutionary biologists have said that everything about the stepwise evolution over time strongly indicates that it evolved in nature and then jumped species.
Oh, of course, it couldn't have been us. So really, this is a story about the self-licking ice cream cone that is the federal bureaucracy. No matter how badly they screw up, it's never their fault. Ooh, we didn't imagine WMD in Iraq, etc. Pick your screw up. It's your fault, racist. But it wasn't just Tony Fauci and the federal bureaucrats who cited that letter. Self-described fact checkers, the one who control the flow of information in our country now, used the Lancet letter to censor anyone on social media who mentioned the possibility of a lab leak. It can't be true. The Lancet says it's not true. 27 eminent scientists say it's not true. Only a few scientists in the face of all of this dared to speak up. One of them was called Gilles Dumaneuf. He formed a group of researchers called DRASTIC. That's an acronym for Decentralized Radical Autonomous Search Team, something that all scientists should be. Jamie Metzel, the former NSC official, soon joined the group. Almost immediately, as early as April of last year, it was becoming clear to Metzel that the lab leak theory was not a conspiracy theory. In fact, it was plausible.
I think that if I had to just bet based on what I've read and logic, I would bet it's most likely this was an accidental leak from a lab.
So it turns out that Metzel wasn't exactly speculating on that. Unlike the scientific establishment, he and DRASTIC had evidence that they had bothered to gather. They found that the official scientific consensus had in fact been doctored at the source. In one instance, they discovered that Xizheng Li, the bat lady in Wuhan, had collected samples of a bat coronavirus that were virtually identical to COVID-19. Where did she get these samples? Well, she found them in a cave in the Yunnan province in China. Several miners had been killed there after inhaling the bat guano left by these bats. She recognized this virus was significant because it had moved directly to humans without going through an intermediate animal host first. The Chinese seemed to be looking for the most dangerous virus they could find, and in that cave they found it. After the coronavirus pandemic began, Xizheng Li tried to hide that COVID-19 was virtually identical to this virus that she had collected in the mine. In her records, she renamed the virus to hide its source. Peter Daszak then published a paper with Xizheng Li categorizing all the various coronavirus strains they had encountered in recent years. The paper listed hundreds of them. And yet somehow, and you'll be surprised by this, they omitted the deadly viruses found in the Yunnan mine. Funny. Were those viruses significant? Well, the government of China appears to think they are. Late last year, journalists with the BBC tried to visit that mine to get some answers. And when they got there, they were followed by plainclothes police officers. They found the road to the mine had been blocked by a broken-down truck. So the Chinese government covered this up. But here's the worst part, and the most shocking part if you're an American. Some within the U.S. government helped them cover it up. They knew all along this was going on, but they buried the truth too, because their interests were aligned with the interests of the Chinese government. Christopher Park, a director in the State Department's Non-Proliferation Bureau, told the agency's investigators, quote, not to say anything that would point to the U.S. government's own role in gain-of-function research. Now, why would he say that? It turns out that Christopher Park was involved in the 2017 decision, a world-changing decision it turned out, to lift the federal moratorium on funding gain-of-function research. Vanity Fair obtained a memo from Thomas Dianano, who was then the acting assistant secretary of the State Department's Arms Control Bureau. In that memo, he wrote that staff from 2 State Department bureaus had warned leaders within his office, quote, not to pursue an investigation into the origin of COVID-19 because it would, quote, open a can of worms. These are Americans working to hide the truth of the origin of COVID-19 from a country that's been destroyed by COVID-19. You can't prevent outbreaks unless you know where they came from, and yet federal bureaucrats prevented us from learning where this one came from. One of the officials who wanted to shut down the probe was Chris Ford, acting Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security. A former administration official with direct knowledge of the probe, direct knowledge, tells this show that Chris Ford was briefed about the lab leak investigation earlier than December 2020, when Ford claims he first heard about it. We are told that Ford wanted it shut down. He was overruled by the Secretary of State at the time, Mike Pompeo. Ford, by the way, was not a permanent bureaucrat. He was a political appointee, but he spoke for many in the career bureaucracy, many of whom we are told wanted to bury the probe out of political animus. They didn't like the administration they served, and they didn't want to give it points. They accused anyone who asked questions about where the virus came from of being a conspiracy theorist. And in our conformist culture, that's enough to shut people up. In other words, they acted just like the people you see on TV, just like MSNBC anchors. They did not act like federal officials who have been sworn to protect American lives. They weren't protecting American lives. They were protecting the consensus, and that endangered American lives. As for actual MSNBC anchors, well, they have regressed to a childlike state of incoherence. Watch this dopey little fangirl swoon over Tony Fauci like he's the bassist in a boy band.
As you learn more and more, you've got to continue to evolve with the data. And that's what I was trying to do, is to always tell the truth on the basis of what the data is. And it was never deliberately something against the president. In fact, you spoke about my emails. You look at my emails, I never in the email said anything derogatory about President Trump.
Well, the true mark of someone is if they look good, even when their personal emails come out. So you passed the test that very few of us would pass.
I love you, Tony Fauci. Still talking about Trump. That's where some of them still are. But there are still adults in this country